The Lord be with you.
And with your spirit.
A reading from the Holy Gospel according to Mark.
Glory to you, Lord.
Jesus sat down opposite the treasury and observed how the crowd put money into the treasury. Many rich people put in large sums. A poor widow also came and put in 2 small coins worth a few cents. Calling his disciples to himself, Jesus said to them, "Amen, I say to you, this poor widow put in more than all the other contributors to the treasury. For they have all contributed from their surplus wealth, but she from her poverty has contributed all she had, her whole livelihood." The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, Lord Jesus Christ.
The drama of life unfolds in our first reading from the first book of Kings. There is a terrible drought. A widow plans to prepare the last meal for her and her son. The prophet Elijah needs food and is sent by God to the widow's home. Then we have God, who through Elijah comforts the widow to not fear and promises that all will be fine. The widow responds with generous giving, and in the end, all 3 human beings end up having food for a year. Her jars of flour did not go empty, nor did her jugs of oil run dry. This is a story of faith, especially when we feel that our jars are running empty or the jugs running dry. This is the drama of our life. There is a dire situation. There may be persons in need. There is trust in God's promise, a willingness to give not from our surplus, but from poverty. And lastly, God's grace is made possible or visible. The God of possibilities become clear. Jars of resources not going empty, nor jugs of blessings running dry. This reminds me of my childhood back in Belize. There were definitely some struggles being in a large family of 11. Sometimes it was difficult to make ends meet, but we knew what the priorities were: food, education, health, utility bills. I also remember how important hospitality is for my mom. When visitors and friends and even strangers stopped by our home around mealtime, Mom would invite them to join us at table. And Mom would usually remind us all, the guests come first, even if it meant that the whole meal should be shared by more than 11 people. Well, being the chubby kid in the family, that did not go well for me. I really struggled with that. It meant that I would ultimately leave the dining table wanting some more. Looking back now, I can now appreciate the lesson my mom taught us. Use what we're given responsibly. Give generously, even from the little we may think we have. And always be thankful. She would say, God always provides. Dios provee. And for me, the lesson there is a lesson of faith, because faith is tested when things are looking tight, when the jars may seem to be empty or our jugs of oil running dry. Today's readings point out that generosity and sacrifice are at the center of Christian life. Both generosity and sacrifice are visible when it costs us something, when we feel the pinch from our giving of time and talent and resources. Without thinking of self, the widow in today's gospel is willing to give all that she possessed. She gives from her poverty. This was substantial, considering that widows constituted a major concern in the early Christian community. They were not included in the Hebrew inheritance laws. They lived day by day, and any resources they had were meager at best. In many ways, they were the vulnerable and the needy that the temple offerings were meant to serve. But the widow's offering did not go unnoticed. Christ commends her, Jesus commends her generous giving, which showed a strong faith in the God of possibilities, the God who keeps his promise, and that God will eventually provide. Her jars of generosity did not go empty, nor did her oil of blessings run dry. Today, the readings emphasize the type of generosity rooted in the sacrificial giving, the total and non-repeated sacrifice of Christ that today's readings from Hebrew point out. This once and for all sacrifice of our high priest who intercedes endlessly on our behalf. That is consolation for all of us, that God hears our supplications and provides for our needs, and many times when we least expect it, and how we least expect. There are times when we are down, when we think we have nothing else to give, when we think that there's nothing left to give. Little remains in the generous barrel of our lives. We may be experiencing emotional dryness, spiritual desolation, physical exhaustion, anxiety in life. And then, by God's grace, we start to see beyond our needs and start looking at the needs of others around, that loved one and community member that needs it as well. And that's how good begets good, when we can get out of our own needs and see how the God of possibilities starts working through us. That others start trusting in God's promise to provide for his people through us. And we ourselves start renewing the trust, our trust in God. There are many times when what may seem as mere pennies that we may have replenish others in community. Those reassuring words or comforting presence of others who give not from their surplus but from their very being. Their offer is priceless. Their accompaniment become the very presence of God that nourishes our faith. And we can think of so many people that have been that for us. Today, let us pause and remember and elevate in our prayers those parents, siblings, friends, public servants, veterans, all those who have given so much not from their surplus, but from their poverty, not expecting honor, not expecting reward or recognition, those who have blessed us with their generous self-gift and service. And may our jars of generosity never go empty, because our oil of blessings, my friends, never runs dry. That is the faith we have in God. Amen.